Are we at one of those moments in history in which there is the necessity for a new world order?
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. They're creating people with horrible traits and characteristics through the manipulation of human biology and consciousness via chemicals in our food, water, and air, in addition to radionics fields that interfere with and change human physiology for the worse. What if an occult ruling class long ago discovered how to influence the breeding process within entire populations for the purpose of making those populations easier for them to control? Epigenetic is the propagation of eugenics by way of social engineering or mind control. This is population control through mind control. Through the television, the mass media, skewing the perceptions of men and women. The feminization of men. It is very important to understand that eugenics is not just about population reduction. It is ultimately about controlling which characteristics are expressed in human society. By breeding certain desired characteristics into the gene pool and breeding certain undesirable characteristics out of the gene pool. That's how eugenics is performed. The science of epigenetics clearly demonstrates that human beings possess the ability to create adaptive changes to their gene expressions via changes in consciousness. Genes have been proven to be only a tendency for biological expression. Since consciousness precedes the genetic expression in the physical domain, if consciousness is changed, then the gene expression in the physical domain can be fundamentally altered. Epigenetics has shown that human beings are not controlled by genes like computer programs are controlled by computer code. When we work to change our consciousness and our beliefs, our biological and psychological code can actually be rewritten and a different expression can be manifested. In other words, we are not our genetic code. That is not who we are.
Rund 200 verschiedene Zelltypen gibt es im menschlichen Körper. Und obwohl alle zunächst einmal das gleiche Erbgut besitzen, unterscheiden sich beispielsweise eine Herzzelle und eine Leberzelle maßgeblich voneinander. Der Grund dafür: in jedem Zelltyp sind andere Gene aktiv, hier rot dargestellt. Welche von ihnen aktiv sind, kann eine Zelle steuern. Dann nämlich binden spezielle Proteine an die DNA und das jeweilige Gen wird abgelesen. Durch sogenannte epigenetische Veränderungen kann sie diesen Prozess kontrollieren. Diese Änderungen betreffen nicht den genetischen Code der DNA, sie sind aber trotzdem vererbbar. So kann die Zelle Gene stummschalten oder aktivieren. durch Anknüpfen kleiner chemischer Moleküle. Ein Beispiel dafür ist die DNA-Methylierung. Sie betrifft vor allem die hier gelb dargestellte Promotorregion, den eigentlichen Lesestartpunkt für die Gene. Cytosin-Moleküle kommen hier besonders häufig vor. An sie knüpfen Enzyme, die Methyltransferasen, eine Methylgruppe, an. Andere Proteine können nun an den Promotor binden und verhindern, dass das Gen abgelesen wird. Es ist damit stumm geschaltet.
Food is information.
And it's a huge piece about how foods, in addition and separate from calories, influence gene expression. It doesn't make genes, it influences how those genes are expressed.
So our food is meant to have a positive effect on the activity of our DNA. It's meant to create a shield for health. That's the promise of nutrigenomics.
Think of the word nutrigenomics like this: nutri, nutrition, and genomics, your genes. It's like food talking to our genes.
My mom always used to say that a great recipe doesn't start in the kitchen. It starts outside with a seed in the ground. Growing up, we knew where all our food came from because my mom's giant garden was basically our grocery store.
Nowadays, more than 80% of soybeans are genetically modified, as is 100% of papaya, and up to 70% of the most popular dried baby foods have GMOs in them.
So genetically modified food, sometimes called GM or GMO food, is food that is grown from seeds that have been altered to give them certain traits. Now, there's nothing wrong with altering the genes of a plant. Farmers have been doing that for centuries. That's how they do selective breeding to produce big red apples or really juicy tomatoes or really beautiful roses. So it's not the genetics that are the problem. The problem is that when they create these genetically modified plants, they put a trait into the corn, into the soybeans, that makes the corn and the soybeans resistant to herbicides. Farmers can now spray more and more herbicide on the corn, on the soybeans, over the growing season. And because they're applying so much herbicide to these GMO crops, some of that herbicide chemical comes through on the corn flakes, on the potato chips, on the corn chips that are made from these crops, and the chemicals are getting into children.
Epigenetics has shown us that definitively our choices during the imprinting window, time when we can imprint, are biologically passed on to our kids and their kids. And it's like there's a universal law at play that, as you step back from epigenetics, crosses spiritual and psychological and interpersonal and now physical lines, that says what you do impacts future generations.
It's in the first 6 years of our lives that the brain is in a functional state, an EEG state, the electrical activity, that is not even in consciousness. A child doesn't even reach conscious brain function until about 6. So the first 6 years of your life, your brain function is lower frequency. It's called theta, which is like a hypnagogic trance, a hypnosis. So the first 6 years of your life, you're like a television camera recording everything around you, everything you observe, just going in from your observations into your programming. So we acquire beliefs and attitudes and behaviors, not from ourselves, but from our parents and our family and our community. These become the fundamental beliefs. A very interesting point. The Jesuits were very proud. They would say, give me a child until it's 6 or 7 and it will belong to the church for the rest of its life. What they were saying was what they knew, which science is now finding out. The first 6 years are programming.
It's okay, it's okay. I'm Celine Dion.
Our children, they are not really our children, as we are all just links in a never-ending chain that is life. For us, they are everything. But in reality, we are only a fraction of their universe. We miss the past. They dream of tomorrow. We may thrust them forward into the future, but the course will always be theirs to choose.
There is a scientific declassified plan developed by the British government 100 years ago to break down the family, to create asexualization in humans. But to do that first, they've got to confuse the gender.
Gender confusion has become the forefront of sexual politics. The battle of the sexes is nothing new. Men and women were created biologically and emotionally different and have played tug-of-war ever since. What's new in this ancient battle is gender confusion. No one seems to be sure what a man or a woman really is or how they're supposed to act. We now must deal with the transgender concerns affecting schools, churches, camps, and workplaces. Bruce to Caitlyn Jenner is the international symbol. Christians seem as confused as the public. Christians dilute their witness when they debate gender-inclusive language in church constitutions or call God she. And making matters worse, Christian men sometimes react to radical feminism with an equally unbiblical macho chauvinism. The Bible says God created men and women in His image. Gender is a fact of creation that pleases God. Both men and women are equally valuable in God's eyes. To deny or alter our sexuality is to live in fantasy. Perverted sexuality may be politically correct, but it's still sin.
Es fällt mir schwer, aber ich glaube auch, dass es wichtig ist, darüber zu reden. Ich bin als Mann auf die Welt gekommen. Ich mache mir mein eigenes Programm, ich bin mein eigener Herr.
Is the purpose of the television ad to make you an informed consumer making a rational choice? No. The purpose of the ad is to delude and deceive you with imagery. So you'll be uninformed, you'll make an irrational choice. That's what business spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year on. And the last thing they want is markets. What they want is coercion and control.
This small minority who are in the know wish to permanently rule the masses of humanity and effectively become God on earth. It is important to understand that contrary to popular belief, the overwhelmingly vast majority of real Satanists do not worship an externalized deity known as Satan in the Christian tradition, but instead see Satanism as an ideological way of being in the world and view the ego-driven self as the quote-unquote God of their religion. They view themselves as God, folks.
Falling on precisely the wrong side of the Bible's account concerning the fall of man and Satan's role. This snake spirit begins the revelation by telling man that he is a god, that reality is essentially an illusion, sin a myth, and that ethically there's no greater commandment than the law of Thelema, Greek for will, as famously stated in the 40th verse of chapter 1.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
I pray for those that are suffering and need your help, that you may empower and strengthen those that can, to help those that cannot. I pray for those that are lost and confused, that you may guide them with your love, light, and truth.